So you've had a chance to talk with each other, finding out what each one of you is doing. Some of you are coming from business, some of you are coming from medicine, a wide variety of backgrounds. The question for you, how many people at this point would feel very comfortable talking to your neighbor and saying, I'm a beginner at what you do. I don't know very much about your field, but I know I can help you. This is not a phrase which trips lightly off of the tongue for most people, but it's something that we do need to be able to learn about, because when we talk about our global grand challenges, when we talk about solving problems, one of the phrases, or one of the words that comes up much of the time is being interdisciplinary. Yes, we have to bring people together. We have to have solutions that come from many different areas. But what does it actually take to be interdisciplinary? And this has been a focus of my life for the past 10 years, and it's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm a beginner, and I can help you at what you do. There's a flip side to this as well, is being able to say, well, I know that you don't know very much about my field, but I really want you to be able to come and help me with it. And also a phrase, it's something that we perhaps sometimes suggest that we want to do, but it's not quite as easy playing it out as it is when you're thinking about it ahead of time. When you're talking about being a beginner, when you're bringing people in, and of course you think about, all right, you're going to have people, I'm going to be able to walk up, I'm going to be able to talk to you. No, not really. You're going to walk into a crowd, you're feeling confident for the first 10 seconds, and then all of the jargon starts up. People are going back, they're making assumptions about what's happened in the past 10 years. You don't actually feel very comfortable joining it at all when you're doing that. When you're asking for people to come in, all right, you're saying, yes, we're going to be able to bring people in. They're going to bring some energy. They're going to have some ideas for us. They're going to bring things that we've never heard about before. But no, you're actually going to have to spend some time explaining to them that they're naive. They don't know what can't be done. They're a bother. It's like having a set of interns. And if you've ever had interns, it's like that first month of explaining to them. And if you're facing a global grand challenge, if you're facing disruption to your industry, do you really want to be spending a month having people learn how to do what you're doing? Well, yes, actually the answer is true. You have to do that. So at Singularity University, we are focused on, as I say, global grand challenges. And when we look at the scope of the problems that we're facing today, when we're looking at what you just heard about clean water, we're looking at energy supply, access to food, and thinking about food when there's going to be another 3 billion people in the world over the next 50 years, how can we possibly start addressing it? Well, one of the ways that we have to think about addressing it is being able to bring in everybody into the conversation on this. And if you're bringing in everybody in on the conversation, it means that you have to get used to being interdisciplinarian. Singularity University was founded 5 years ago. We focus on a 10-week program where we bring people together from around the world. And when we talk about being interdisciplinary, we are not talking about, say, simply having people from different engineering departments get together, simply having people from both the finance world and the economics world get together. We focus on bringing people together from every possible field, from every country around the world, as long as they can get a visa into the United States. From as many backgrounds, social economic background, from a person who's just sold a startup to somebody who's never traveled outside of their own village. Now, Singularity University, as we talked about, we focus on exponential technologies. And why do we focus on exponential technologies? We hear about them all of the time. We talk about, okay, you have something and it's 1 million times, it's 1 billion times, it's 1 trillion times more powerful than something that existed before. But what does this actually mean to us? What does it actually mean other than saying powers of 10? When we think about our mobile technologies today, yes, you've got an iPhone. Yes, it is 120 times more powerful than what NASA was using during the space program. But do we actually know what we can do with that? For example, we actually often don't see the technologies as being exponential. Sure, we have a pile of disks lying around. I've got hundreds of them in my closet. And if you look at a disk like this disk, you could also think about it, this is the equivalent of a book. And it used to be that you're able, of course, carry a book around with you. And if you wanted to have Project Gutenberg, you could have a few books carried around with you. Then, of course, we switched over to CDs and then DVDs and then stacks of DVDs. So it's equivalent of being able to carry around your own personal library with you. But then things keep on going on, and we've moved from being able to carry gigabytes to being able to carry terabytes of information to being able to carry, a petabyte of information. You could carry a petabyte of information in your hand if you were doing it in micro SD cards. What does that mean? That's actually you're able to carry an entire library with you. And when you start going about, scales above that, if everybody in this room had a handful of had a petabyte of information, we'd have an exabyte of information. And what does that mean? It means that we would be carrying multiple copies of all the libraries in the world with us, all of the copies of all of the videos ever made, books in your pocket like grains of sand. All right, that's really interesting. You're carrying it around with you, but what is it that you're doing with it? What does it mean that what used to be this is a supercomputer, and this is something where you're actually walking through the supercomputer, one of the fastest supercomputers of today? Well, all of you now are carrying a device which is faster than the fastest supercomputer in the world was 20 years ago. This is interesting. All of you have the capability of carrying the world's information around with you in your pocket. All of you have the ability to be able to start addressing problems, to be able to do computations, to be able to start simulating the world in a way which wasn't possible before. And of course, all right, this is exponential technologies. We've all got this capability. But again, it's just, it's numbers, it's exponential charts. What does it actually mean? What can you actually apply with this? And why do we need to do it? Because a lot of times when people talk, exponential technologies, they're just going to save the world by themselves. No, it's just a technology. It's just something that you can do. You can have all of these technologies and put together the world's most amazing library of cat videos. And certainly I've seen that. It's a wonderful thing to have. Global grand challenges. We today are facing a legacy of our own history. These exponential technologies themselves have come at a cost. We live in a world we're able to be here today because we've developed a technological system which is very energy intensive. We think at a moment's notice, yes, we can hop on a plane, we can come over here from thousands of kilometers away. We are living in a world which is depending on very, again, energy-intensive sources, which has a lot of pollution. And even if we decided right at this very moment we're going to be able to stop using any energy-intensive technology and switch over to the better things that we have with wind and water, we are faced with the legacy, we're faced with the embedded energy in our own history, which is going to be decades for fixing. It's with us no matter what we do. And so as we're looking at this and we're saying, all right, yes, we have all these amazing technologies which are just sort of sitting out there, but who can use them? Yes, okay, so you have a supercomputer. How many of us are actually able to program a supercomputer, even if it's a supercomputer in your pocket? And we have all these issues going on, but how many of us today here are able to go and deal with energy and spend 10 years being able to understand what's going on in gaining access to energy? How many of us are going to be able to go and think about air pollution or water pollution or access to safe housing and being able to build houses that don't collapse in earthquakes? When we're looking at the scope of the problem and looking at the scope of the ability of the tools that we have, it actually can be really overwhelming to do. And so that's one of the reasons, I myself have worked in air pollution and energy efficiency and was able to do my part in places, was able to help in California. But I say, how could I work at a larger scale? How could I actually start doing something about this? And how can I start thinking about this not in doing sort of artificial fixes at a local scale? How can I do this in a way where we're not just sort of talking about, okay, well, we're going to have a problem with these things, but somehow we're going to be able to bring technology together. Somehow, we can create a virtual world about this stuff and we'll just be able to ignore these problems. That doesn't work. So again, Singularity University. And you're going to be hearing details about this from my colleagues, but I wanted to talk about what it takes to actually be interdisciplinary. What does it actually take to be able to bring people together? In our case, we focus on having a 10-week program. We're bringing 80 people together from around the world, from as many countries as possible, from, as I say, as many backgrounds. What does this actually look like? What does it actually feel to be interdisciplinary at this scale? And what does it feel like to actually apply being disciplinarian to a problem? Because with our students, we bring them together and we want them to actually apply these technologies apply exponentials, apply these supercomputers that we're carrying in our pockets to the biggest problems that there are. So we select these students using 2 different methods. Some of them we have them apply to the program. Others we have them do contests in their own country, in Sao Paulo, in Spain, in India, and many other places where we actually ask them to start thinking about the technology which you use. And it could be biotechnology, it could be engineering, it could be policy, not really what you'd call a technology at all. How would you help 1 million people in your local area? And the people who win these contests come to the program for the summer. As David was saying, we're hosted at NASA, sort of in the middle of Silicon Valley. So we're able to, stop people on the highway and have them come in and be able to give lectures about what's going on in artificial intelligence, what's going on in biotechnology, what's going on in energy. But that isn't enough because, again, all right, so you have all of these technologies together. We also want them to focus on global grand challenges. And so for each of the areas of global grand challenges, we have faculty who focus on those areas, people who come in who've been working on water problems for 10 or 20 years, people who've been working in clean energy, people who've been working on building housing, so that as the people are talking about technology, as the people are thinking about potential solutions, we've got people who are not only there being able to say, all right, from the faculty side, you seem to be preparing to break the laws of physics when you're doing that. I think you need to be able to back off from this potential solution. But also being able to say, all right, you're bringing the solution together and you're assuming that everybody has this particular type of mobile technology. What happens if it's only 50%? Or what happens if it's only 20%? Or often the flip side is more true. There'll be an assumption about in a particular country that, okay, you don't have access to water in this country from what we're seeing, therefore they don't have much access to technology at all. And that is no longer true. And to be able to find this out, it's not enough to be able to read about technology. It's not enough to be able to study it or bring data together. You actually have to have people from the area. For example, in one of our classes a couple of years ago, they were looking at solar technology, and people are saying, well, what are countries where we could be able to roll out a particular solution? And when they're thinking about Africa, somebody said, oh, well, what about Nigeria? And people are saying, well, our assumption about Nigeria is, of course, with the oil and gas there, why would they want solar? Well, the answer is that, of course, oil and gas is very expensive. If you have a generator, you've got monthly costs for the fuel. People can be spending $100 to $200 a month in fuel there alone. So it actually might pay for itself to bring in solar right now. And our students, by having people from Nigeria in the class, are able to say, please check your assumptions about what's going on in Nigeria. And if you need to check them more, here's a list of people that you can talk to. That actually made a really large difference. So 10-week program. The first 5 weeks of the program, we want them to learn about technologies and learn about the sort of the penumbra of social issues, of economic issues, of financing, of what it's like to be an entrepreneur if you're not an entrepreneur already. What is it like to be an economist if you're not an economist? So they're talking about these ideas, they're learning it, but then also all the time they're thinking about how do you help 1 billion people? So they start coming together and coming up with ideas. They start rolling through the ideas, practicing, starting to think about them, starting to build, working with each other to do them. And then the final 5 weeks of the program, they actually start to make, they actually start to build. And I'd like to give examples of what they're doing right now. So one of the things they talk about, Singularity University, are you about coming up with brand new technologies? We're not, although sometimes it happens. In this past year, some of our students, they got together, they were thinking about how do you program DNA, what are the languages of it, and so they decided to invent something which is sort of the equivalent of coming up with Perl, coming up with a new programming language for dealing with DNA and for coming up with a less expensive way of making it. Now, in this particular case, yes, they came up with they came up with a new technology. They were able to think of a new idea, combining ideas together. And they were able to do it in part because we're able to have people from multiple areas working together, a wide variety of backgrounds, people with a common vocabulary and a common goal, but as different experiences as you possibly get. But instead, we also ask people, and a better way of doing this is just, how do you reuse technologies that we already have on hand? Don't think about coming up with new things. What are the technologies which surround us today, which, again, we have a cell phone. We think it's just a cell phone. Well, it's also a supercomputer. When you're looking at, for example, malaria, when you're looking at HIV tests, when you're looking at doing, chemo, if you're doing chemotherapy for leukemia and you have to be able to do weekly tests, what do you need to be able to do? You need to be able to draw blood. You need to be able to find the thing that you're looking for. You need to be able to measure it, and you need to be able to report it out. Well, what technologies do we have to be able to do it? They were looking around, and they were able to say, well, okay, what's something that's pretty common around, sort of lying around the house? DVD player. But this is not an ordinary DVD player. This is a DVD player where you've actually got a lab-on-a-chip technology. You put a blood sample, it spins, a centrifuge pulls things out to where things go. And the Blu-ray is it's a laser. It's able to pull information off of this thing. So instead of using a $50,000 device for being able to measure blood, what about a $150 device for being able to do it? Reusing technologies which we have on hand, something which will then be able to spread around the world. Another way that people were working on this is being able to think, and again, sorry, yes, they came from a wide variety of fields on this, and this is not something that would have come if you just had engineers or just had medical technologists together, but bringing people together. When you think about malaria detection, this is also something where we focus on it around the world, but it's very expensive, it's very difficult to do. How can we speed up technologies for it? In this particular case, we had participants who got together, and one of them was a participant who's working on cancer detection, cancer in the blood. They were brainstorming with other people, and he was saying, well, this algorithm that we use, it can find things which are slightly off shape. Other people who've been working on malaria said if you can detect malaria, or if you can detect things that have changed shape, I think you're actually going to be able to detect malaria in the cell. They actually started building it together. They started making it. And by the end of the program, we actually had something which has an example of being able to quickly detect malaria using an algorithm which was originally designed for detecting cancer cells. So these are just 3 examples of things that can happen when we look at global grand challenges through the lens of technology. The technology isn't the end-all and be-all, but the technology is something that enables us, but only if we're willing to get together, to be able to learn to be beginners, to learn to be able to have a common vocabulary and not assume that any one type of person is going to be able to solve these problems, to be able to get to the point where we would feel uncomfortable if we didn't say, hey, I'm a beginner at what you do, but I can help you. Thank you.